I don't have a freaking clue. Hey, it's Chris. We're talking Dragori Games and their latest Spellrift Legends prototype. What do you get when you cross, quote unquote, Eldritch Horror type schematic along with a Slay the Spire deck building innovation in an open world type setting? Let's talk. What do you need to know? What do we see hands-on right now in front of me? The good, the bad, what are you going to like? What don't I like? Who is this right for? As we're going through with their campaign on GameFound, should you back it? This is to help you decide. Let's talk. Now, those are some heavy comparisons. Let's start there before we get into the gameplay. But how apt are those comparisons when we're mentioning huge names in the hobby scene? We've got a Slay the Spire deck build mention. We've got the Eldritch Horror Stomping Out Fires vibe. You have an open world explorative type video game description with multi-use cards along the lines of Gloomhaven. Does it work in all of those ways? Is that a selling point with those descriptions? Well, yes and no. I would make the argument that on the surface, many of those descriptions are close. But ultimately, it's not exactly like any of those in the same way, both as a blessing and a curse. I will start with the Slay the Spire because that is by far and away the biggest name brand recognition. Is this that? Is this that of the board game, which is sitting right over to my left? No, it's not, truly. Does it mimic several of the elements that are associated with that, including the drawing and the building in a most general way? Absolutely. Eldritch Horror. A stamp it out, jump around between places on the board, closing portals or rifts in order to prevent the bad guys from spawning and overwhelming you before the big bad comes and you can decidedly win the game or lose. Yes, that's a little bit closer. Then the open world aspect. Now, again, this is a prototype, so there's very limited aspects of things like the heroes. I only have 3, for example. The boss, I only have 1. There's a limited amount of regular monsters, events, and elite monsters that you will be going up against. And then there are the tiles laying in front of me. You can see that they are arranged in a certain way. However, they will apparently, per the campaign, not always be in the same way. Even double-sided, which mine are not right now, to offer variability. As you can also see, each of these 8 around the outside, in addition to the one center in the middle, is going to have different lettering to tell you where things may spawn, as things like these voids happen as the boss progresses on a round-by-round basis, then telling you, if I don't drop it here, exactly where they spawn in 3, then subsequently spawning enemies as well that may end up in the same or different locations, also in a different numbered variety. In each of these 8 around the side of the board, just out of camera shot, you can see that I also have this event deck where you will get reinforcements, you will get resources, and you will have skill checks that you're needing to take. All 8 of these have them as well around the outside that are randomly shuffled and part of the event nature that you are going through on a turn-by-turn, round-by-round basis. It has an Aeon's End type vibe mixed with the Eldritch Horror because as you're progressing, you will actually have an enemy deck that also progresses along with you. And these enemy decks are created a similar vibe to the Aeon's End, where you take a certain number of the basics, a certain number of the advanced, and then a certain number of the end game to create, in this case, what was a 9-card deck as you go through, giving you different things that are going to spawn, having different effects, as well as scaling for the player counts to modify the difficulty in that way. Now, the base game says that it plays, I believe, 1 to 5. My play has only been in solo, so I can't speak to what the higher player counts are going to be like. With knowing what the learning curve is for this game, I would make the argument that what you want out of not really an open world, because that's what we were just talking about, right, it is very self-contained from area to area. And so I would make the argument that it isn't really open world, because when I think open world, I think, I go wherever I want, I do whatever I want when I want to. And with these portals opening up, with the monsters spawning in different areas based on, potentially what card gets flipped up and what token is grabbed, that's where you're going to be going. So it's not really giving you your own sovereignty in that way. The meat of the game, though, is the deck building that we previously talked about. You are given both a deck for your individual character, as well as a starter deck that you are going to be mixing and matching. And this is the most exciting, this is the most thought-provoking, this is the most engaging element of this game, and this is also where a hell of a lot of fun comes in, but it's going to also potentially create some dilemmas in how these multi-use cards, Gloomhaven-esque, are managed. As I mentioned, multi-use cards, with top being for battling and bottom being for skills, or as well the previously mentioned skill tests, as well as exploits, which are basically buffs as you're going along. And so you're having to decide on a round by round basis with the hand of cards that you have at your disposal how you want to utilize each of these cards to manage the fires that are on the board in the first place, each of them giving you a completely different dynamic of what you're going to have the ability to engage with, granting you everything along the way through this possible combination. And this is where the blessing and curse comes in, is as you level up. That's how it ties into your character cards here. Not only with your asymmetric abilities, but your stats that you're keeping track of. And that is what you're going to be managing, in addition to an asymmetric secret objective that you get to choose one of 3 at the beginning of the game that's going to best fit your personal play style. And that personal play style, again, is emphasized with this deck because these are all asymmetric. And they are incredibly varied, even with the prototype. This is the standout without a question. You'll also notice that they are colored because you will fight enemies as well that are more susceptible or less susceptible potentially to certain types of attack. And so in this case, the boss monster I have in this one, the Eye of Nothingness, is more susceptible to a specific type of damage, the green here, as you go along. And so what you're having to take in account in the different areas as well is what you're going to be mixing and matching in that way. The tricky part and the blessing of this, truly, setting it apart from many of the other deck builders that you may be familiar with, is that there are different rarities within this deck. But the draw 3 keep 1 mechanism helps mitigate that in a way that is quite unexpected as well, because it's not always, as with, say, the previously referenced Aeon's End, the multi-use factor of these 3 elements of taking it into account. It is not always the most obvious one that is going to give you the most benefit. Are you really needing to attack and spread out and deal damage? Are you needing the skill benefit of the checks that this character is deficient in? Or do you need the exploit to basically buff sooner rather than later? And all of these are going to give you the way of customization that I have not had the pleasure of playing a whole lot similar in this aspect to make it so varied and so different. Now, that is not to say, though, that we don't have other ways of customizing, because we also have a very extensive item deck that you will also be utilizing to upgrade your character in very similar ways, especially to mitigate said damage and said skill checks that I talked about previously. you also, in addition to that, will be going through and drawing various quest cards that are going to, well, force you to take these skill checks or other objectives along the way. But on the opposite side of things, the enemy side of things, not only are you dealing with the boss deck, but you are dealing with the Void Rift deck when these rifts occur and having to deal with the consequences of them with said skill checks in addition, giving you experience or failing and potentially falling forward, but also gaining negatives along the way to balance things out, to not let you feel like you're too overpowered or overconfident. Now, there are various wins and loss conditions within this game, but in the prototype, it is more straightforward. I'm not sure if that's going to change with the final copy or the boss dependency or anything along those lines. If your team gets wiped out, if the doom becomes unmanageable that the boss deals or spawns with initially. You're also going to be keeping track of your enemies with the very simplistic AI system based on dice that are colored and corresponding to, say, the multiple different enemies that are present on a battlefield as you're going back and forth, because ultimately this is a I go, you go, and last one standing still wins. But as you roll these dice, this determines the AI of what they're going to be doing, keeping track in a colored manner of which enemy is which, so that when you're looking at this shadow spinner, for example, here, you can see that the stats down here at the bottom, 2 health, but also that the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s are going to give a different AI attack or defense system that will then prioritize which of these enemies you need to take out in what order, again, with those multi-use cards to engage you in more of a puzzle-like Gloomhaven manner. Supposedly, this game is listed from Dragori as being able to play one-shots as well as campaigns. Now, only having one boss, only having one of these, it's hard for me to tell exactly what a linked campaign scenario is going to look like. So let's talk pros and cons for a minute. What did I like? What didn't I like? Let's start with what I didn't like and what I have concerns about, since I've already sort of talked a little bit about many elements that I do like. One of the low points going into that campaign is because this is a prototype, because I don't have any sense of what that narrative is going to look like, it is definitely the weakest part of this. If you are a narrative person, yes, you can get this from the various quests that are kind of okay and giving you a little bit. You can kind of get that from some of the boss cards as well, with some of these void rifts in addition, but it is by far and away not the emphasis nor the strength of at least the prototype right now. The other aspect of things is that a lot of this, as I mentioned, is heavily dice dependent. And so if you do not like dice and mitigation and dealing with that, it's going to leave you feeling rather, well, favoring the Gloomhaven in the first place, even though you can still multi-use the cards in a similar manner. This is going to be more of a learning curve. This is heavier than, obviously, a zombie side. This is heavier than a Slay the Spire in terms of learning the game itself to get it to the table. It does not lend itself well in that way. The rule book definitely leaves something to be desired in terms of figuring things out, which I would hope between now and obviously the final version lays things out more in a smooth manner. So the ability to get it to the table is going to be higher than something to say like a Cthulhu Death May Die in the same regard, even though you're dealing with sort of those same mixed elements. I also had some turns playing this, again, solo, where you just find it to be lackluster, where the skill check is the majority of your turn, and you're like, oh, well, great, and that's fine. But it leaves you wanting comparatively. Now, let's talk about the pros. When you're giving the battle phase of things, when I'm going up against the spiders or the fallen angels in that way, the emphasis of this asymmetric deck and truly the amount of cards that are present here and the ability to mix and match and to truly customize along the way with this is incredibly impressive for a prototype. Is it balanced? I don't have a freaking clue. But this is clearly where a lot of the attention has gone into, And I really hope that they lean stronger into this. Personally speaking, I've got enough narrative games. I've got enough games with a semi-decent narrative. But I don't get a lot of games for the narrative in the first place. I get them for this level of excitement, the fun that figuring out the engine and the gears of how I can combine the multi-use in the top and the bottom to provide the enjoyment in the first place. It drives me to figure out this chaotic-esque puzzle with the mitigation that I have at my disposal. The items do the same thing. Just so much and so many options in that way to provide you a very unique build and opportunity to customize your character, truly customize it. Not just, you know what, I did this build and this build. I did A of this and B of this, or I did B of this and C of this. It is truly allowing you to do that. Now, as that is going to be the other question mark, because I mentioned that this is the setup that I have. I don't know of any other setups. These are supposed to be double-sided. I'm assuming it's not always going to be the same color ratio as well, and that's going to affect some of the dynamics that could go along with this game in addition. Will the number of spots in each area change? Right now it's A through D. Are there going to be more barriers or terrain changes or something to spice up the movement in these ways rather than the card play move situation that you often find yourself in? I also worry about the open world description in that same way that I talked about, that, okay, is this going to be that variable? Because the variability is there with the locations and their decks in that way. It's there, as I mentioned, with the items and the asymmetric deck builds and some of the bosses and, you know, the monster decks that you're going to be pulling through with events and elites and everything else along those ways. But is it going to be on the map itself? The setup and teardown is very fast and very easy, but will it provide the same level of detail and excitement that these others are doing so well already? And that's where I don't know. Now, I didn't go into full details, full rules explanations, talking about gaining experience and needing a certain number of experience to get those cards that you're getting from a lot of these events or these enemies. You have condition cards as well, 5 of them that you have both the ability to gain, but also to lose as curses on the opposite side of things here. So there are layers in there that we have not seen. There are also several expansions already listed on the Game Found page, which brings me sort of to the, okay, should you back it or not? Well, with Dragori, with their previous Odalin, with Arena, and that style, they have been heavily miniature based. So I would expect this in the box and plus or minus miniatures to be a hefty price. And so I think it has to go into that of how are miniatures adding to this? And truthfully, I don't feel the need for necessarily having miniatures as part of this. So if they offered an option not to, you're not necessarily losing that aspect, because I worry about them covering up some of these areas. For example, I mean, I need this token here. I need the spiders. And if I have big miniatures that are next to this, I worry about a Cthulhu Death May Die situation where I can't actually fit them on the board in the way that I want to be able to tell what's going on. And so standees, or even deluxeified tokens, or chip theories, if you will, in this way, would almost be preferential, in my opinion, or fit very, very well with what you're presenting. Slay the Spire has not suffered any lack of attention or lack of praise because it didn't have miniature versions of things and your characters to stand next to, but not actually influence the gameplay. So I would love to see sort of an Awakened Realms-esque vibe where you have the ability to do it or not to, but I know that affects the production and the cost and the difference in that aspect as well. And that then begs the question again of what the expansions are going to add. Are they going to add just more sheer variability? Are there going to be additional layers of complexity? That would be my concern, because again, it's not that this is hard to learn. But there is more, like I mentioned as well, than your comparative Zombicides or Cthulhu Death May Dies, so that if you are playing this with multiple people, the barrier to getting it played physically in front of you is going to be more significant, which is why, weirdly enough, as a non-solo person, I think this fits best as solo, because there is less downtime in terms of some of the analysis paralysis that goes with the decision making of these various cards that you are having to choose from with their multiple options every single turn that you are taking and strategizing. So then that begs the question, does it scale as well? I don't know. All of the bosses, the enemies, they have scaling that is present depending on, what portion of the game it is and what card you're drawing. That's a fine-tooth comb, and that would also make me go, okay, what does the final product look like? Am I willing to take a risk that that can be done successfully? I would make the argument with the previous Teneras and Arena. They have a pretty good track record in doing that, but this is a different element with a deck build main focus rather than a D&D inspired combat. So just something to think about in addition. There you go. That is Spellrift Legends, Dragori Games. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any comments, questions, or concerns. And let's see where this campaign and game end up. I'm excited. Are you? Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Thumb it if you like it. Peace out.